I hope you find this interesting. I find it fascinating. I was reading in the 14th chapter of Leviticus about the treatment for someone who has been healed of a debilitating skin disease, an infectious disease. And after the person was healed, he would go to the priest, and the priest would decide if it really was healed. He would examine it. And if he was, there was a ceremony he did, which involved the placement of blood of birds or a lamb on the ridge of the ear, on the thumb, and on the great toe of the person's foot. Now, you might think this is just some kind of mysterious ritual that has no meaning. Some people put spiritual meanings to it, like, well, this means we should hear the word of the Almighty, we should accomplish His word, and the toe, we should walk in His pathways. But I don't think so. There are things in the Bible that are purely spiritual. There are things that are purely physical. But most things seem to me to be both spiritual and physical. Now, what is in lamb's blood or in the bird's blood? White blood cells, oxygen, urea, which is healing for the skin, albumin, which is protein, part of the skin, immunoglobulin, a type of white blood cell, antibody. Now, this was like you just got over a terrible case of bronchitis and your doctor says, let's do another 7 days of the antibiotic to prevent it from starting all over again. So this, putting the blood on the skin, which will be absorbed slowly, because, for example, the ridge of the ear has a lot of cartilage, so it would be slow to be absorbed. Now, if it was the lobe of the ear, that would be different because it's very vascular. So this is done for cases where infection is at a high risk of returning. Now, let's compare this to modern methods. Where do we get monoclonal antibodies from? There are many companies producing this now, and it's very expensive. It's $2,100 to get the actual, let's call it medicine, and it's another $450 for them to administer it. Now, they can put it in your vein, or they could put it under the skin. This means this would be in the muscle, pointing the needle like that. This would be into the skin, intradermal, and when the needle's like this, it would be under the skin. Now, they usually do it that way because in the vein, it causes a lot of pain. So they inject a virus or a bacteria into the mice. What kind of bacteria? Well, let's say tuberculosis. The white cells are produced by the spleen of the mouse, and then they are removed from the mouse, and they are fused with human cancerous white blood cells. So it's actually called a human-mouse hybrid. And since they are myeloma cells, it's called hybridoma cells. And these divide indefinitely, so they can produce millions of monoclonal antibodies. So this is very low cost for these companies to produce. Now, when they get the human cancer cell and combine it with the white blood cell from the mouse's spleen, then they take this and they inject it into the peritoneal cavity, which is just this cavity around the abdomen. It's like a space there, protecting all these organs here, the intestines. So then the reaction of the mouse, his body, is to fill that peritoneal cavity with a lot of fluid, because it's just received this cancerous, infectious injection. So of course this area gets very swollen with fluid. All right. Now, the mice are alive. They're not anesthetized. This is why the Anti-Vivisection Society has made a lot of complaints against the way these companies are producing the monoclonal antibodies. Let's compare this to the procedure in the Bible with the lamb's blood and the bird blood. These are slaughtered, humanely slaughtered animals, which they have to slaughter anyway because they use the hides for clothing and for their tents, and they eat the meat, and they use these animals are all the only way they have to clothe themselves and make their tents, so they have to be slaughtered anyway. All right, so of course, you're taking the blood from a slaughtered animal. Compared to these companies, they're taking all of this new creation of fluid and with antibodies. They're taking it while the animal is alive. Now, could they do it with sheep, goats, horses? Yes, but it's more expensive. Mice reproduce like every 20 days. And how long do sheep take to reproduce? 5 months. Now, these monoclonal antibodies are not given to just anybody. You have to have really good insurance or a lot of money. They also only can give it at the very beginning of your infection, else it won't even work. So this also serves for an advertisement for them, like, wow, look, everybody who gets the monoclonal antibodies gets cured. Sure, they get cured because they're not at the end stage, and they are people who are not very ill. This is a business. All right, the blood that's taken in the Bible to put on the skin of a person, they result in polyclonal antibodies. Now, animals produce polyclonal antibodies, so do we. What does this mean? These antibodies can recognize, let's say this is a toxin. These type of antibodies can recognize the toxin in any part of it, all these areas of identification, so they could cling to it and stop it from producing. But the monoclonal antibodies, they can only recognize one single spot on the antigen, on the toxin, on the virus, on the bacteria. They can only recognize one spot. So the polyclonal antibodies are much more effective, but of course, they're more expensive to produce. Like I said, sheep versus mice. Now, there are some companies who make polyclonal antibodies today in modern times, and they use horses, rabbits, and goats. All right. Remember that in biblical times, they did not inject the animal with a virus to make these antibodies, like a skin virus. No, because the animals already had all kinds of antibodies in them. They're living outside, they're going from field to field. The young animals, when they're very delicate, first born, they're brought into the house of the people, so then they are being exposed to all the viruses in the environment of the indoors, because they're with the people indoors. Now, back to the clothing. The animals are used for clothing, for the tent. Now, sheep's wool, they need it in the winter. So you're going to say, well, why do they have to slaughter the animal? Just, take off his wool. Yes, but they can't wear wool all year long. What did they wear in the summer? Linen. Okay, that's made from flax, which is a plant and a flower. They can't use that all for work clothes because it breaks very easy. I don't know if you've seen or felt linen, you'll know what I mean. So that's why they needed to use the hide of these animals for their work clothing. And their tents, of course. You can't make a tent out of wool or linen. Now, you might not like animals being killed at all, but if the animals get too prolific and there's too many of them, they're going to eat all the people's food, and they're going to, I mean, it's just not going to work. And these animals, remember, they were from family farms. They're not a big corporate company like we have now, which have problems with polluting the environment. And they use a lot of chemicals these days, unlike family farms that were back then. That's about it. I hope you think about these things. I hope it's interesting. And remember, the Bible is also a book of science.